The lights in the hall shone brightly, reflecting off crystal glasses and the apparently sincere smiles of colleagues. Everyone was there to celebrate another year of company achievements, but at that moment, my mind was far away. As they toasted to camaraderie and success, I knew that, in an instant, everything would change. I was about to destroy the illusion of perfection that hung over that environment. After all, there are betrayals that cannot be allowed to pass. The weeks leading up to that day had been a whirlwind. At first, it was small details. Schedules that didn't match up, messages deleted in a hurry, excuses that weren't properly aligned. The nights became a minefield of false smiles and distant kisses. Until one afternoon, while going over documents in my office, I found an email exchange that shouldn't have existed. Ambiguous phrases between the lines full of promises. I didn't want to believe it. The person who shared the most intimate plans with me, the dreams we had built, was now someone else's accomplice. And worse, this other person was someone close to me, someone who claimed to be trustworthy, someone I welcomed into my home, my social circle, even my office. It was this discovery that sent me into a spiral of anger and planning. If they were going to destroy my life behind the curtains, then I would use the stage to expose the whole farce. "Are you sure you want to do it like this?" my lawyer's voice echoed in my head, even though he wasn't present in that room. Yes, I was sure. It was no longer about saving what was lost. It was about saving myself, about freeing myself from the chains of a lie that was growing like an invisible tumor. As the clock ticked closer to the moment of the keynote speech, I felt the weight of everything I was about to reveal. It was like carrying a lit dynamite in my hands, knowing that, in the end, the explosions would hit everyone, including me. However, I was willing to take the consequences. I took to the stage when the director announced my name. The noise of conversations died down until an expectant silence filled the hall. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm while the microphone in my hands amplified every breath. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice steady even though my insides were shaking. "Tonight is a night of celebration, but also of revelations." There was a low murmur among those present, and I felt curious eyes turn to me. The silence returned when I continued. Over the years, I've learned that trust is the basis of any relationship. Trust at work, trust at home, trust between friends. But what happens when that trust is broken? My voice became firmer, although a tremor of emotion began to emerge. In recent months, I've been betrayed in ways you can't imagine. The betrayal didn't come from a distant enemy. It didn't come from a competitor trying to bring the company down. It came from where I least expected it. Someone in the audience let out a nervous laugh, as if it were a joke. I continued without hesitation, staring at the crowd, although my vision only searched for two faces. Some of you here may be wondering what I'm getting at. Don't worry, I'll explain. I'm going to tell you exactly how I was betrayed by two people I blindly trusted. The murmurs grew louder. Some people tried to interrupt, but I raised my hand, asking for silence. And then I dropped the first bombshell. One of them is in that room. And he's more than a traitor, he's a profiteer, who used inside information to compromise my work, while destroying my personal life. The room froze. Some faces turned pale, others, curious, leaned forward. My breathing quickened, but I kept going. This isn't just a personal matter. It's a betrayal that affects everyone here. Because the man you respect, with whom many of you work directly, has also sabotaged the company, manipulating contracts and using corporate secrets to gain personal advantage. The impact was immediate. "You can't be serious," shouted someone in the crowd, but I just raised my chin, staring into the void ahead. The words were out, but the story was far from over. In the midst of that chaos, as I pointed out who had betrayed me both at work and in love, I couldn't imagine how much this was just the tip of the iceberg. The truth I would reveal there would be devastating, but what was to come would be even darker and more unexpected. The betrayal I had exposed was just the beginning of something much bigger, something that would change my life and the lives of everyone in that room forever. And at that moment, one question echoed in my mind: how far does the courage of someone betrayed go? Welcome to the channel where betrayal is never romanticized. Here, we believe that trust is sacred and that betrayal is the fastest way to destroy lives, dreams, and relationships. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but they carry a powerful moral: betrayal never ends well. Get ready for an intense and revealing narrative. Take a deep breath, because what comes next will shock you. Good story. The ballroom was impeccably decorated. Lights hung from the ceiling like cascades, illuminating tables adorned with white linen tablecloths and elegant floral arrangements. The guests' voices mingled with the ambient music, creating a comforting murmur of celebration. In the center of this scene, Ethan walked, a polite smile on his lips, greeting his colleagues and maintaining a posture that conveyed confidence and authority. Ethan was the kind of man whose presence filled any room. Tall, with an elegant build and a firm gaze, he had built his career on dedication and strategy. Head of one of the company's main divisions, he was respected by his colleagues and admired by his team. But above all, Ethan was a man who valued connections. His marriage to Ava was, until then, the greatest symbol of his emotional stability. Ava, for her part, was a delicate and charming contrast to Ethan's resolute energy. With hair that fell in soft waves over her shoulders and a smile that seemed to light up any room, she had a serene presence that won everyone over. Although she didn't work directly with Ethan, she was part of that corporate world. She was an artist who had recently started exploring creative projects, but she was always present at company events, supporting her husband in his achievements. Ethan affectionately called her his muse, because she was the one who inspired him to strive for more, to achieve the impossible. That evening, as Ethan moved around the room, his mind wasn't only focused on work. He often glanced in the direction of Ava, who was chatting animatedly with a small group in a corner of the room. She seemed so at ease, laughing at something someone had said, her fingers delicately holding a glass of wine. Ethan felt a soft warmth in his chest, pride, love, or perhaps a mixture of the two. Ava was his anchor, his reason for fighting so hard. But not everything was as perfect as it seemed. Although Ethan and Ava's marriage was admired by many, there were tensions growing silently between the two. Ethan's job required long hours and frequent travel, which left Ava alone for long periods. She understood, or at least tried to understand, that Ethan's success required sacrifices, but sometimes the weight of loneliness was overwhelming. On the other hand, Ethan also felt the impact of these absences. He knew that no matter how much he tried to compensate with grand gestures, such as romantic trips or expensive gifts, nothing could replace his presence. There were times when he noticed a certain melancholy in Ava's gaze, something she never verbalized, but which made him wonder if he was being enough as a husband. The discussions, when they took place, were always subtle, with a calm tone, but loaded with hidden meanings. "You're always so busy, Ethan," she would say, as he reviewed contracts in the home office. "I just wanted more time with you." He, for his part, tried to smooth over the situation. "This is just a phase, Ava. We're building something big here. This is all for us." But the words seemed to lose their force over time. Even so, they continued to cultivate moments of closeness, small rituals that strengthened the bond between them. On Sundays, Ethan insisted on cooking breakfast, even if he burned half the pancakes. Ava would laugh and hug him from behind, murmuring that the effort alone was worth it. Sometimes they would walk together in the park near their home, discussing trivial things like movies or books. These moments were precious, but also rare. At that party, there was something different in the air. Ethan sensed it, although he couldn't pinpoint exactly what it was. Perhaps it was the accumulated fatigue from months of incessant work or the fact that, for the first time in a long time, he was noticing a greater distance between him and Ava, as if something invisible was coming between them. However, he ignored this annoyance and concentrated on his colleagues. He chatted animatedly with the company's CEO while, in the background, his mind wandered. Ava remained the center of his thoughts, her presence just a few meters away, but at the same time seeming so distant. Ava, for her part, was also lost in thought. Although she maintained her easy smile and flowing conversation, there was a swirl of emotions beneath the surface. Over the last few months, she had felt torn. On the one hand, there was the security and comfort that Ethan represented. On the other, an emptiness that she didn't know how to fill. She loved Ethan, or at least believed she still did, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something in her life was slipping through her fingers. When Ethan's eyes met Ava's in that hall, she smiled, a soft smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. He returned the gesture, but felt a twinge of doubt. Something was wrong, he knew, but now was not the time to deepen that feeling. The atmosphere around them was a stark contrast to what they were both feeling. Colleagues were laughing, toasting, and sharing stories of achievements. The company had achieved impressive figures that year, and the party was a well-deserved celebration. Ethan should have been overjoyed. After all, he had played an important part in this success, but he couldn't shake the heaviness in his chest. As the evening progressed, Ava went to the bar to get another glass of wine. There, she met a familiar face. One of the company's executives, a man she knew only superficially. They started chatting and, for Ava, the casual conversation was a welcome distraction. He was charming, articulate, and made her laugh easily. Ethan, on the other side of the room, noticed the interaction, but didn't take much notice. Ava had always been sociable, and he trusted her. What Ethan didn't know, and perhaps neither did Ava completely, was that seemingly innocent moment would mark the beginning of a chain of events that would change their lives forever. The weeks after the company party went on in a strangely predictable way, but Ethan could feel the unease growing like a slowly moving cloud obscuring the sky. There was something in Ava's smile that seemed less sincere, something in her words that sounded too rehearsed. He tried to push the thoughts away, convincing himself that it was just the stress of his exhausting routine. However, small changes in Ava's behavior began to take shape, making it impossible to ignore that something was out of place. Evenings spent chatting on the sofa became rare. Ava would get up earlier, saying she needed to concentrate on her paintings. When Ethan asked about her new projects, she answered vaguely, looking away or changing the subject. There were also the silent calls, times when she would leave the room with the phone in her hand, mumbling that it was just her mother or a friend. Ethan wasn't a naturally jealous man, but he was beginning to realize that each of these excuses left a void where trust had once existed. One day, when Ethan got home early, he found Ava in his office, sitting at his computer, the screen quickly minimized when he heard the sound of the door. "You're home early," she said, turning around with a smile that was more like a shield. "Yes, the meeting's been cancelled," he replied, trying to sound casual as his gaze landed on the reflection of the screen. He didn't press the issue, but the image of that moment stuck in his mind. Ava, on the other hand, felt torn between guilt and a strange excitement. Her relationship with Ethan was stable, but there was something about her chance encounter with Daniel, the party executive, that had awakened feelings in her that she thought were buried. He had an engaging way of talking, a confidence that made Ava feel seen and valued in ways she hadn't experienced for some time. What had begun as innocent exchanges of messages soon turned into something more, meetings that she justified to herself as work meetings. Daniel was a persuasive man with a magnetic personality who always seemed to know what to say. He was successful, charming, and made Ava laugh in a way that hadn't happened for a long time. "You deserve more," he once said, while holding her hand over a discreet cup of coffee. "You're amazing, Ava, and you deserve to be reminded of that every day." The words resonated in a dangerous way, igniting something inside her that she didn't know how to extinguish. Meanwhile, Ethan began to notice more inconsistencies. The nights when Ava claimed to be in the studio were followed by evasive messages and excuses of tiredness. He began to investigate in silence, putting together pieces of a puzzle that led him to conclusions he didn't want to accept. One day, he decided to look at the GPS history of Ava's car. The address of a hotel downtown appeared repeatedly, although Ava had never mentioned being there. Doubt began to eat away at Ethan, a slow poison that kept him awake at night. He oscillated between confronting her directly and looking for definitive proof. He decided to take the second route, fearing that, without evidence, his suspicions would be dismissed as paranoia. That Friday, Ava left the house saying she was going to an art exhibition. She was dressed with unusual care, something Ethan hadn't seen since the early years of their marriage. She avoided his gaze as she said goodbye, muttering something about being anxious about the event. As soon as she left, Ethan grabbed his car keys and followed her. He kept a safe distance, his heart racing as he watched Ava's car pull into the hotel parking lot. He parked a few cars back and waited. The wait seemed like an eternity, each minute increasing the tension in his chest. Finally, Ava got out of the car and walked to the entrance. Ethan felt the ground give way beneath his feet when he saw Daniel, with his confident stance, approach and greet her with a warm smile. They walked in together. Ethan remained in the car, fighting against the avalanche of emotions that overwhelmed him. He felt anger, pain and humiliation vying for space in his mind, but also a strategic coolness began to emerge. It wasn't enough just to know. He needed proof. He decided to wait. 40 minutes later, he saw Ava and Daniel leave together. She was smiling, and he was talking animatedly while gesturing. They got into a cab, and Ethan followed them to a reserved restaurant, where they disappeared through the glass doors. The car's remote control felt heavy in his hand, as if it held all the tension of that moment. The next few weeks were a silent agony for Ethan. He hired a private investigator to confirm his suspicions. The photos he received a few days later left no doubt. Ava and Daniel met regularly, sometimes in hotels, sometimes in discreet restaurants. Each image was like a stab, but Ethan knew he had to stay calm. He wouldn't confront Ava until he was fully prepared. One evening, Ava returned home, exuding the confidence of someone who believes she's fooling the world. "How was your day?" she asked casually, as she took off her coat. Ethan forced a smile. "The usual." "And yours?" Ava hesitated for a split second before answering. "Tiring, but productive. I'm finishing a new project." Ethan watched her in silence for a moment before replying. "Glad to hear it." Internally, he braced himself. What he knew, what he had seen and the evidence he had, all converged towards a single goal, to expose the truth. The next morning, Ethan went to work as usual, but his mind was elsewhere. The anniversary of the company's founding was approaching, and the party would be the perfect opportunity for what he had planned. He knew it would be painful, that it would have a huge impact on his and Ava's lives, but he also knew that he couldn't live with the lie any longer. That night, as Ava slept beside him, Ethan looked at her and tried to find traces of the woman he had married. He didn't know if what he felt was love, pain or just the need to understand why things had come to that. Finally, he closed his eyes, knowing that the calm before the storm was about to end. The hall was packed, illuminated by the warm lights of the chandeliers hanging from the high ceiling. The company's anniversary party was the most eagerly awaited event of the year. People laughed, toasted and indulged in the celebration, while Ethan stood on the fringes of the crowd, watching with calculated calm. He wore an impeccable suit, but his gaze reflected the internal storm that was consuming him. Today would be the day to expose not only personal betrayal, but a network of manipulation that went far beyond what he could have initially imagined. Ava looked stunning that evening. She wore an elegant dress, and her smile seemed carefree, although her eyes betrayed a certain tension. She didn't know how much Ethan had discovered, but she had sensed something different in him over the last few weeks. He was more reserved, more introspective, as if something was being carefully planned. Ethan looked around the room, searching for Daniel's face. The man was in his element, circulating among the guests, talking confidently, as if he controlled the atmosphere. Ethan clenched his fist, but took a deep breath. Now was not the time to lose control. There was a plan, and he needed to follow it. When the microphone was handed over to Ethan for the traditional thank you speech, he walked to the stage to polite applause. He watched the crowd for a few seconds before beginning, his voice firm and controlled. "Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today, celebrating another year of achievements. This company was built on pillars of dedication, hard work and, above all, trust. Trust between colleagues, trust in our leaders and, of course, trust in our values." The room fell silent. Ethan's words seemed to carry a different weight, a tension that began to spread through the room. He continued, his tone becoming more direct. "But what happens when that trust is betrayed? When those who are supposed to protect our interests use that position to satisfy their selfish ambitions?" He paused, letting the words reverberate in the air. Ava, who was close to the stage, remained motionless. Daniel, on the other hand, looked uncomfortable, adjusting his tie as he looked around. Ethan held up an envelope in his hand. "Over the last few months, I've had cause to investigate some irregularities. What I've discovered goes beyond the personal. I discovered that there is someone among us who used inside information about this company for his own benefit. More than that, he used a personal relationship to access that information." The crowd began to murmur, and their gazes turned to Daniel. He stepped forward, trying to keep his composure. "Ethan, this is absurd. What are you implying?" Ethan calmly stepped down from the stage, approaching Daniel. His eyes were fixed on the man, while his voice remained controlled. "It's not an insinuation, Daniel. It's an accusation. Here are the records of altered contracts, clandestine meetings, and financial transfers that directly benefited you." Daniel took a step back, his face becoming a mask of indignation. "This is a farce. You have no proof of anything." Ethan opened the envelope, pulling out a stack of papers. "Enough evidence to present to the council and, if necessary, the police. But that's not all, is it?" He turned to Ava, who was pale, hardly breathing. "You're involved too, Ava. Not just as an accomplice, but as a central piece in this scheme." The room fell deathly silent. Ava tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Ethan continued, his voice now charged with emotion. "I trusted you. I built a life with you. And what do I get in return? Betrayal, both at home and at work. While I was working to secure our future, you were selling my trust for nothing." Ava finally found her voice, a broken whisper. "Ethan, I can explain." He shook his head, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. "There's no explaining it, Ava. I had doubts about our relationship, but I never imagined that you would be capable of stabbing me in the back like that. Not only did you destroy our trust, but you jeopardized everything I fought for." Daniel tried to intervene. "This is between the two of you, Ethan. Don't involve the company in something personal." Ethan turned to him, now clearly angry. "Don't you dare minimize that. You used our relationship to access information you should never have. You manipulated Ava, made empty promises and dragged her into this mess. You both thought you'd come out unscathed, but that ends now." Ava started to cry, but there was no consolation coming from Ethan. He turned to the microphone again, now with a stronger voice. "As of today, measures will be taken to ensure that this company is never again used for selfish interests. And as for my personal life," he paused, looking at Ava with a mixture of sadness and resolve. "That ends here." He dropped the microphone and left the stage, leaving the room in a chaos of murmurs and shocked looks. Ava tried to follow him, but was stopped by colleagues who were trying to understand the gravity of what had just happened. Daniel, for his part, was approached by members of the company's board, whose faces were already showing the severity of the consequences to come. Ethan left the building, feeling the cold night air envelop his body. The pain was immense, but there was also a strange relief. He knew the consequences would be long and difficult, but the worst was over. He had exposed the truth, and now, finally, he could begin to rebuild what had been destroyed, even if it meant starting from scratch. Ethan stood outside, breathing deeply of the night air that seemed to carry a new weight. His mind was in chaos, but the relief of finally getting it off his chest was undeniable. Even so, emptiness enveloped him, a feeling that the end of a crucial stage in his life had left marks that would be difficult to erase. On the other side of the glass doors, chaos reigned. Ava stood in the middle of the hall, surrounded by stares and murmurs. Her makeup was smeared with tears, and the confident posture with which she had entered that evening had completely disappeared. Daniel tried to keep up appearances, vehemently denying the accusations, but the weight of the evidence presented by Ethan was already beginning to bear down on him. The company's board was arguing amongst themselves, while the legal team was already being activated. Ava felt the air in the hall become suffocating and, on an impulse, left the place without looking back. She knew she needed to talk to Ethan, but she feared what she would find. He wasn't just a hurt man, he was someone whose trust had been irreparably broken. There was a difference, and she knew that this was what made what was to come even more difficult. In the apartment that had once been their home, Ethan entered and closed the door carefully. The silence was overwhelming, but somehow welcome. Every corner of that space brought back memories that now seemed distant, as if they belonged to another life. The photo of them together on the bookshelf, Ava's paintings on the wall, her perfume still in the air, everything seemed like a cruel reminder of something that no longer existed. Ethan walked through the living room, removed his suit and loosened his tie before sitting down on the edge of the sofa. His mind replayed the events of the night, the faces of Ava and Daniel etched like an open wound in his memory. He wanted to scream, but instead he remained silent, staring into the void. It was as if all emotions had drained away, leaving only a deep exhaustion. Hours later, he heard the sound of the key in the door. Ava entered slowly, her face marked by tears and obvious guilt. She hesitated to see him there, but decided to face the conversation she knew was inevitable. "Ethan," she began, her voice broken, I don't know what to say. But please, let me explain." He held up his hand, interrupting her. "I don't want to hear excuses, Ava. Not now. I just want to understand, why. Why did you do it? Why did you risk everything we've built?" She took a deep breath, trying to organize her thoughts, but the words came out in disarray. "I didn't plan for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you. But over time, I began to feel forgotten. Invisible. You were always so focused on work, so distant, and I felt alone. So you decided that the best solution was to cheat on me." Ethan's voice was full of pain and disbelief. "I'm not perfect, Ava, but everything I did was for us. And you threw that away." "I know," she replied, the tears flowing freely now. "I know I made a mistake. I'm not trying to justify what I did, but please believe me when I say that it was never about you. It was about me. About how I felt lost, disconnected." Ethan shook his head, getting up from the sofa and walking across the room. "That doesn't make sense, Ava. If you were unhappy, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't we try to work it out together? Instead, you chose to turn to Daniel, of all people." Daniel's name hung in the air like a poison, and Ava shuddered to hear it. "I didn't plan anything with him. He made me feel heard, seen. And somehow, that got out of hand." "Control," Ethan repeated, laughing humorlessly. "That's a funny word to use when you've consciously decided to stab me in the back. And on top of that, it involved my job, my reputation. It wasn't just personal, Ava. You knew that and you carried on." She looked at him with despair. "I know I've ruined everything. But please don't give up on us. We can fix this. We can try." Ethan stared at her, his eyes reflecting a mixture of anger, pain and exhaustion. "Do you really think this can be fixed? It's not just what you did. It's what it means. You destroyed something that was the basis of everything. And, honestly, I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust you again." The silence between them was deafening. Ava knew that there were no words that could undo what had been done, but she still tried. "I still love you, Ethan. I've never stopped loving." He laughed bitterly. "Love? Is that love to you? Because to me, it feels like anything but love. You didn't just betray me, Ava. You made me question everything I believed about us, about you." She burst into tears, but Ethan didn't console her. He remained motionless, as if the weight of everything that had happened had turned him to stone. The next morning, Ava woke up alone in the apartment. Ethan had left early, leaving only a brief note on the table. "We need time. I need time." The words were like a blow, but she knew he was right. There was no way to resolve this immediately. She would have to deal with the consequences of her choices, and the possibility that her relationship with Ethan might never be repaired. Ethan, for his part, drove aimlessly, trying to process everything. He needed space, he needed to think about how to rebuild his life after the devastation. He knew it would be a long road, but for the first time in weeks, he felt a spark of determination. Whatever came next, he would face it head-on. The past could not be changed, but the future was still in his hands. With these thoughts, he moved on, leaving behind the home that had once been a symbol of happiness, but was now a field of ruins. The journey to rediscover himself had only just begun, and he was ready to face whatever lay ahead. Months had passed since the night everything fell apart. Ethan had left the apartment he shared with Ava and moved into a small loft downtown. It was a simple space, but enough for what he needed at that moment: distance. Distance from everything that betrayal represented, from the life he once thought was perfect, and above all, from the pain that Ava still symbolized. He spent his days in meetings with the company's lawyers and administrators. The insider trading case involving Daniel and Ava had unfolded into a legal battle that was gaining more and more attention in the media. Ethan, determined to protect the integrity of his team and the company he had helped build, worked tirelessly to ensure that those responsible faced the consequences. Daniel, unmasked, was summarily dismissed and faced a criminal investigation. His professional reputation was in ruins, and doors that once opened easily for him now remained locked. With his assets frozen by the courts, he tried several times to contact Ava, but was ignored. Ava, now alone, finally understood that Daniel's supposed attention and affection had never been about her, but about what he could get from her. The truth hit her with the force of her loneliness: she had lost Ethan, Daniel, and herself in the process. Ava decided to stay in the apartment. It was painful to be there, surrounded by memories of a love she herself had destroyed, but moving in felt like an escape. She needed to face reality, even if it meant facing the ghosts of her choices every day. The studio that had once been her creative refuge now seemed empty. Her inspiration had disappeared along with Ethan's trust. She tried to make amends in small ways, seeking therapy to understand why she had allowed her life to take such a turn. But the void left by Ethan was undeniable. Ava wrote several letters to him, all of which ended up in the trash, unable to find words that could repair the irreparable. Meanwhile, Ethan, while still dealing with the emotional scars, began to rediscover parts of himself that had been suffocated by the weight of the last few years. He took up forgotten hobbies again, such as running in the morning and playing the guitar. In a discreet cafe he frequented, he met Claire, a photographer who, like him, bore the marks of past relationships. Claire was different. There was a lightness in her company that Ethan hadn't felt for years. They began with casual conversations about music and photography, but over time these encounters evolved into something more. Claire didn't push. She let him be vulnerable, let him talk about Ava, about Daniel, about the company. And, contrary to what he expected, she listened without judgment. Ava saw Ethan's face for the first time in months in a report about the company's legal victory against Daniel. He looked different, stronger, more determined. She felt a mixture of pride and regret. The man she had destroyed was rebuilding without her. Still, she knew she would never have the right to seek a second chance. One day, Ava received a subpoena. Daniel had formally involved her in the investigation, trying to shift some of the blame. Ethan knew this, but chose not to intervene. He wanted Ava to face the consequences alone, as he had faced his. But, in a final gesture of kindness, he made sure that the company's lawyers made it clear that Ava had not benefited financially from the scheme. It was a silent gesture, but one that left her in tears. In court, Daniel was convicted of fraud and embezzlement. His arrogance stayed with him until the last moment, but the verdict was final: he would spend years in prison. When the judge read out the sentence, Ava was present, watching from afar. It was a closure she needed to witness, even though she knew Ethan's justice didn't stop there. The real lesson she would take away was the price of her choices. Ethan and Claire continued to build something solid and true. It wasn't perfect, he still had fears and insecurities, but, for the first time in a long time, he saw a future with vibrant colors. Claire encouraged him not to define himself by the past, but to learn from it. And, slowly and carefully, he began to believe it. Ava, for her part, found some relief in her art. Her paintings, once full of soft, abstract landscapes, now had darker but also deeper tones. They reflected her pain, but also her determination to find purpose again. She knew she would never win Ethan back, but she decided that this would not be the end of her journey. There was too much to learn, too much to fix in herself. One afternoon, months after everything, Ava met Ethan by chance in an art gallery. He was with Claire, laughing at something she had said. Ava watched them from a distance, without approaching. It was obvious that he had found something he deserved: peace. And at that moment, Ava realized that her place in his life was now just a reminder of what it shouldn't be. She left the gallery in silence, but with a new determination. There was a long road ahead, but she knew that this time it would be traveled with more truth. She would never forget Ethan, but she was ready to start again, even if alone. Ethan and Claire left the gallery and walked to the nearby park. The sun was beginning to set, tinting the sky with golden and orange hues. He held her hand, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. It was a new beginning, and he knew there were still challenges ahead. But with Claire by his side and the determination not to repeat the mistakes of the past, Ethan finally felt he was on the right track. And so ends their journey. A story of pain, betrayal, learning and new beginnings. Comment below on what you thought of this outcome and share your opinion on the characters' decisions. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to follow more stories like this. And remember, betrayal is never encouraged here, but the lessons it brings should never be ignored. Thanks for listening.